Hello again, everybody. This is Craig Evans of Autism Hangout, and thank you for tuning into this installment of the Moving Out series, where today I get to introduce to you somebody that has just been so instrumental in helping Deanne and I find a group home in this situation for Nolan. I want to introduce you to Rosemary. Rosemary works for Dakota County here in Minnesota. Rosemary has just been so helpful in not only understanding Nolan and finding out what's best for Nolan, but giving us instructions along the way and what we're supposed to do in order to succeed with this huge move. Rosemary, thanks for being on Autism Hangout.
Well, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Like most people that have a child with special needs, we were hoping for independence, and fortunately we had you as our social worker. But how did you go about looking at our son to determine what sort of housing services were available for him?
Well, what I started with was looking at Nolan's age. And I also looked at his desire for moving as well as your and Deanne's desire for him to move. And I wanted to make sure of what your vision was for him and what his vision was for him. I then looked at the list of openings that were available in various foster care settings. And sometimes people want to move into an apartment, sometimes they want to move into a group home setting, which are really called adult foster care settings. And I wanted to make sure that he moved into a setting where there were people his own age and with some similar interests. And then really looking at what Nolan's desires are. What does he want? How does he live his life? Does he need to be in an extremely structured environment? Does he need to be in an environment that has some structure and maybe a lot of room for flexibility? And it seemed to me that Nolan needed a place where, first of all, there were somebody who loved animals. Second of all, someone that could go with his flow and how he goes through his day and even how he goes through his nights.
You really evaluated Nolan. You, as an advocate for Nolan, you knew his likes and his dislikes, and then you looked at the roster of housing services that were available. Can you tell us a little bit about that list? I know some of them are private, some of them are corporate. I mean, how did you go about matching this up?
Well, the list is put together by the Dakota County licensors. And these are the people who go out and they license the group homes. They license the corporate foster care group homes, the family foster care group homes, and then the group home that Nolan is in it's an adult foster care, but it's something in between a corporate and family foster care setting. And this list primarily is from the county, and it's available to the social workers.
Are the corporate situations more for independent living, let's say a young man or a young woman that has a job, as opposed to the foster care, which are more privately held?
I would say yes, only in that typically when someone moves into a corporate foster care setting, the idea is that they'll be there maybe a year or two before they move into a more independent living setting. And so typically in the corporate foster care, people work during the day. They might go to a day program or a transition program, from 9 until 3, and then they're at the group home or the foster care setting in the evening and on weekends. And so it's usually a little more structured. The other difference is that there are staff that are hired to come in.
Now, we're in Minneapolis, Minnesota, for all intents and purposes. What you are doing here, is this pretty much replicated by social workers all across the United States?
I would say all across Minnesota. I don't know. I really can't speak to across the United States.
Okay, and you have this list of providers. How often do you, I won't use the word cleanse the list, but how do you go through and evaluate? Is this something that's done on a 6-month basis, or?
Well, there are good questions, different ways of looking at this. The licensors primarily do the evaluations, the formal evaluations. Well, they will send a written piece of paper for each social worker to complete and fill out. The other ways, the more informal ways of doing it, are going out there and getting to know who the providers are.
Right.
And I do that through going on tours with my clients. When I have clients living in a particular home, that's how I get to know the people. That's how I get to know the staff. I look for responsiveness from staff. If I call, will I get a phone call back? Will I get an accurate answer to my questions? Does the person really seem to know the client?
All right, you bring up a really interesting point here, and this is one that concerned me. Is there a national database of like these housing services that somebody such as me, a layman, could access that? Because where you're going through the evaluation based on your study of the child or the adult, is a parent allowed the opportunity to do that, or do they have to go through social workers all the time?
I think a parent, there is a database through the state of Minnesota of all of the different licensed providers. And you would go on the Department of Human Services website and be able to access that list. From there you can call and talk to people, and it's basically talking to people. I don't believe, and I haven't seen any kind of evaluation like this group home gets 4 stars or this adult or family foster care gets 3 stars or anything like that. It's really going out there and touring and talking to the people who are running it.
Are these homes readily available?
Sometimes they are, sometimes they are not. Sometimes there's availability in spaces and there isn't enough money in the system for people to access the homes. Other times there is enough money and there may not be enough spaces available. But typically it works out. If somebody needs something, they'll be able to get it.
Okay, now that you bring up the money issue.
Yep.
I know that's really complicated, and
Yes,
I know
it
that
is.
Deanna and I only saw a portion of it. I mean, we had work to do, but how does somebody pay, how is the housing service paid?
The housing, okay, there's the housing for, I'm going to talk about Nolan. He's in a licensed adult foster care setting. And so there's 2 parts of it. There's the room and board piece, and then there's the independent living skills foster care piece.
Okay.
The independent living skills foster care piece, in his case, and in many people's cases, is paid through the waiver system, through the CADI waiver.
Waivers.
Okay, there's also the D waiver. His happens to be through the CADI waiver. The room and board portion can be paid entirely by the person, or in many cases, and in most cases, part of room and board is paid for through a grant called the Group Residential Housing Grant.
Is this national?
And this is not national, this is in the state of Minnesota.
Okay.
Other states may have very similar programs.
Okay.
The waiver system is run by, funds are given to the states and then the states run them the way they run them. So what happens in Minnesota with waivers could be doing differently or going on differently in Wisconsin.
Yeah, and I know from living here that the state of Minnesota is one of the more progressive states.
Absolutely it is.
So for those of you folks that aren't in Minnesota, if you can learn from what we're doing here, it might be able to help you not only in your situation, but help your legislature come around to how this can best be done. All right, this was a traumatic thing for Nolan, because like so many people that are on the spectrum, the Asperger's is really one of his less debilitating conditions. His anxiety is really
huge.
Yeah. So is there like a break-in period, or like when you take your kid to college and you drop them off, you give them a month or so and they're fine.
Right.
How long does it usually take for somebody on the spectrum to move into a home to acclimate? Is there any rule of thumb here?
I would say no. It truly depends on the person. People who have extreme anxiety, it could take up to 6 months.
6 months.
Yeah. Or it could take a month. It just simply depends on what their skill level is in dealing with their own anxiety. It depends on the skill level of the person that is, running the home or is living with him. I think a huge piece too is the family participation. How is the family participating in helping the person through this transition period? And it can be very difficult.
How does a parent know when a child is ready, when a young adult is ready to go into independent living? Are there cues?
Well, what I've noticed, I'm not a parent, but what I've noticed in clients is the client is saying, I'm ready to go.
Okay.
I mean, they're absolutely saying that. They're starting to talk about it. Or it may be the family is absolutely ready for the person to go, and the person isn't necessarily ready, but the family is like, no, you're an adult now, you need to leave. We have other things we need to do. It's getting, too difficult to have another adult in the house at this point. And so that's another time. And that it's very hard on the person, but you want to then gradually get them used to going into new places and introducing them to homes and introducing them to the idea.
What can a family do to prepare their young person for this?
Well, include the person as much as possible in the decision-making process. Always, always, always.
How about like visits ahead of time? Do you take them out and with you as you're looking at these different places?
In most cases, yes. In other cases, if the person would get, far too anxious to do a lot of visits, I would say have the family go and do the visits, have the family then introduce the idea to the person, then follow up with a visit to maybe 1 or 2 places that you think would work. Because typically the family will know if you walk into a place, and you'll know if this is going to work for the person or not.
Yeah, you get a feel for it. What other words of wisdom might you offer somebody?
Patience. We're getting, the budget cuts are everywhere, so there may be wait lists for people to move out. Be good stewards of any money that you do have coming in to help your person, and use your social worker. And if you don't have one, get one.
Well, I can't emphasize that enough, because Rosemary's been such an assistance to us. Rosemary,
Well,
thank you so much for helping us out with this.
Well, you're so welcome. Thank you.
And thank you, Autism Hangout. I'm going to be back again soon with another installment in the Moving Out series.